Hey everyone.
Hey, Christina. Thanks for waving at me. Uh, can you hear me just fine?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I just jumped on a little early, so we're not having to start. I just want to make sure everything was working. Hmm. Christina, since you're on, and I see you, so everybody else is also on. I pushed this button that said Spotlight Video. Does that mean that like my face is bigger on your screen now?
Yeah, your face is like the only one we see right now.
Oh,
Well, I mean, I have like the couple of squares on the side.
okay. I'm trying to figure out because if I'm recording this, I want to make sure that like somebody who's not on, right? So like I enjoy seeing everybody, but then I don't know what's the best way for like recording it. Because I could stop this step up. So when I do that, what happens?
You're still the big one.
Oh, okay. I don't know what the heck's going on. Okay. Well, I don't know if it just records my screen or if it records everybody's screen. Guess we'll see. I guess we'll see, huh? I guess if it doesn't work today, I mean, it'll record. It does record my, in case you want to see my face, in the recording ones. Yeah, I guess what to put. I see you, Tom. I feel you. Anyways, okay, yeah, we'll play around with that. How's it going? Anybody? That's a general question.
Going good.
Everything, you know, y'all had lots of other classes, right?
Yeah.
How were they going? Ooh, sorry, I just poked my dog in the eye. Good? Come here. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
they're going good.
So crazy.
It's hard to like listen to the other ones.
Because they're not as interesting as.
Yeah, like no one talks and then like no one's on the video and it's just hard to pay attention to them.
Yeah, I could see that being a problem. I mean, that's part of the reason why I was like, somebody's gonna have to talk with me because it's not fun just to talk into a camera by yourself. So.
Can you teach class the entire time like that? Just Tonks?
Just with Tonks just sitting on me, like looking and.
Oh, nope.
Yeah, she's done now. She was like, I'll put my grizzles, and then so I let her up here, and then she was like, no, I don't like this.
Perhaps not.
I bet if I had some kind of like food to entice her, she would be like, yeah, I'll sit up here all day long.
Right.
Okay, class starts at 9:40, right?
Yes.
For reference, for everybody who is slightly confused by this, I literally have a post-it note at work that has like class 9:40, and I have a reminder on my computer that's like class at 9:40, and it tells me what time class is because I'm like, yeah, what time is it again? And which is why I ask you every day what time class ends, because it's like a thing I just cannot. It is not remembering. Okay, so let's start by welcome everybody. Hey Olivia. Sorry, I like seeing your faces. Thank you all for using your camera. So in case you didn't notice, your grades for your first exam are up. You all did really well. I think the average was like an 89 or something. I mean, it was which is a good average for a class. It's really hard to like, because I didn't grade into like, I mean, I graded your individual exams, but it's not like on paper where I can like mark and be like, good job, and like write notes or like tell you why you missed something. I literally did like a spreadsheet of like how many points you got on each question. So if you're curious about the grade you got and you want to talk about it, if you want to email me, I just can't send it out to everybody because it's got your names and everybody's grades on it. And so I'm happy to send you the points you got per question. And then that way you can know what you missed or what you didn't miss. And then you could kind of go back. And then if you want to talk about it, we could schedule some time. I thought really quickly, going over the exam might be, that's what we would do in class. The first few questions were the definitional ones. I think most people had it. I think one of the questions that every once in a while tripped people up was number 3 was in terms of prices used to calculate tariffs. Free on board is the price of a good that is exporting port. And it'd be favored by, and the original answer I have is like sellers or exporters, but there was somebody, and I don't know who, uniquely put in buyers, and it was like, okay, well, yes, buyers, whoever's benefiting from the value from it. So like a buyer is also wanting it to be the lowest tariff because then they can sell it for the highest price, right? So they're getting the better margin, and so that's was also correct. Number 7 was the infant industry. The number 8 was Guyana and Suriname, where you were calculating the labor to capital ratios. Suriname produces capital intensive goods because they're more capital intensive, whereas Guyana should produce labor intensive goods. Those are their GDPs and population, just in case you wanted to know. And it's a Heckscher-Owen theorem. And so throwing that there. Hey, Cora. And then let's see, the WTO, you'll have that. Number 10 was the productivity output on the tape with Turkey and Greece. I had 2 of you, and I want you to say, I wrote it down. Where's my note? No, it was Brandon and I think Mary Lynn. I think both of you made some kind of funny pun. Thank you for getting my joke. So it was meant to be as funny as it was, which was that Turkey should produce gravy and Greece should produce chicken. And then walking through the advantages and opportunity costs for both of those. For number 11, I know I'm just going, I assume that you all can look at your own exam and then think through this. For number 11, one of the things that kind of tripped some people up was, it didn't trip it up, you just didn't go as, a lot of you gave me the answer of dumping, and specifically it was persistent dumping, or the idea that it was dumping that was kind of happening. So I didn't count all points wrong, but like, I think it was like a point or 2 if you didn't specify what type of dumping. And you could argue, and like, I think somebody made the argument that was like, well, it's happened for 3 years, we might want to call this specific. I think at that point, like, even if you just called out a type of dumping, but sometimes people didn't. And then part B is countervailing duties. And so a lot of people would put like tariffs, and you're like, yes, it's a type of tariff, but I specifically wanted to know what type of tariff that was because we called that out a lot in class. And it's at the dumping margin. And so most of you got that, which was 20% or $50 a bale. By the way, not the prices per bale, but Tajikistan does ship cotton to Kazakhstan. And then on the big graphic question, the big thing was that the U.S. was a net exporter, and then they would become an importer because the world price drops. And then the graph, for the most part, everybody mostly got it. Let me see if I have a, okay, I don't know how to, you know what? I will take a picture of my key and I will send that to you guys later. Let me write a note. Because I would draw it out right now, but I feel like that's gonna waste our time in class. So, so let's do key number, what number is it? 12, 3, 4, 20 years. And so a few of you gave me autarky versus trade, or the second world price, and the question specifically is like the first trade, not autarky. And so there was a little bit of that. And so what you should have had was there's 2 triangles. They should have been the plus and the minus the triangle. And then part D was looking at kind of the other side. The idea was to think about it as these other countries who are now exporting to the U.S. or their producers are gaining and their consumers are losing. And so some kind of answer around that was correct. So that's kind of the overview of the exam. Were there any questions on that before? And again, like I said, if you want to know specifically what you did and didn't get correct, please, you have to send me an email so I can send you like the breakout of what questions you got, and then the the questions and then the points And then if you want to talk about why you missed those points, let me know. So are there any questions before we move on to our lecture for the day? Everybody is muted. So I'm going to assume that nobody has questions. Okay. Like literally a head shake from somebody would be no questions. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so let me do this where I share my screen, and let's share that. And let's do this. Okay. Do you see my little iPad screen? Okay. So I know it's a little blurry. I think it's because oh, and that it's not supposed to be paused. It says my screen sharing is paused, and I don't. Oh. Okay. You can see my screen. What? You can see that, right? I need somebody to say something or perfect. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, so this is the best I have today. I think there's a way that I can, sorry. I'm also muddling my way through this. I thought there was a way that I can make it so that you can also see my face too, but I think it takes my face off and then puts my face screen as what I'm sharing. So
we can see you on the side. It's just like the screen is like the big one. At least I can see you on the side. And like 3 other people.
Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay, now I see myself. The reason why because I think when it records on my screen, I think it's recording what my screen looks like, and so I couldn't see me. In case you want to see me when you're trying to do your oh, I see a little chatty box. Yeah, so Sahid, I will answer your question later. Okay, just for okay, so we're going to start section 4. There's this like mini in between section. Oh, I see it. I see this. So there's this mini section because I wanted to put it in the last section, and then our semester finished really quick. And so what I wanted to start with today was this kind of this thing on intra industry trade. And so the idea behind this is we have been basically specifically talking about just straight trade flows from going from one country to another, and hey, we're trading this thing and we're all going to be happy. The deal though is that what we actually have a lot of times is we have these intermediate goods are going places, and so we wanted to make sure I wanted to make sure we had like a mini section on that. And so let's define intra industry trade. I made my pen really big. Can everybody read it?
Yeah.
Intra-industry trade is so it's when a country exports and imports goods within the same industry. Or product group. So the idea is that we're going to have, so I'm going to go ahead and just define. So this is intra-industry and inter-industry. Trade is a country exports or imports goods or services in different industries. So what we have is we have these two types of trade, and I think a lot of times when we think of trade, we're thinking about kind of inter-industries. That, oh, you know, we're shipping chicken to a country, and they're going to ship cars to our country, right? Or whatever the case is. We're thinking kind of two different products. Intra-industries where we're really shipping the same type of product. It's the same industry or the same type of good. And this literally might be that we're both shipping cattle to each other. And that's really weird to think, like, why if I'm shipping cattle to you, why are you shipping cattle to me? And sometimes it's a difference of quality or the type or the quantity of things. So an example of intra-industry trade is could be here. So we're going to talk about intra-industry, intra-trade examples, and those might be like automobiles. So we trade, you know, we're sending Chevys and Fords to Germany, and Germany is, I mean, I know that they also produce BMWs and Volkswagens here, but they might also be shipping us those parts. And so that's where we're getting both of those trades, even though it's the same industry. So that's intra-industry. Another example might be cattle or beer. Right? Think about beer trade. In Australia, right, ships in our beer, but also ships out Forster's beer. And so we have this kind of both beer trades go moving both in and out of those different countries, but they're within the same industry, which is kind of weird to think, because up until this point, we really have specified like, hey, you have a competitive advantage, you produce it and you ship it somewhere else. And that doesn't change here. It's just that we think about the slightly differentiated products that are moving, because oftentimes, even in commodity products, those are shifted into another product, or they're transformed. The cattle example, let's use Japan as an example for that. We ship US beef to Japan, right? But we also ship, what is it, Wagyu? Is that it? Does everybody know what that is? I don't know. Yeah, that's the word I'm trying to say. Wagyu beef back to the U.S. because it's really expensive. It's a Japanese beef, you know, it's a Japanese cattle breed, and there's a whole bunch of things about flavor profiles and things like that. And so we're literally shipping beef to both these different countries in both ways. That's an example of intra-industry trade. And I'm not going to go into. There's an index for how you can create like how much trade is moving. What I do want to do is think about why we might trade. 4 reasons for intra-industry trade of homogeneous goods. So, you know, kind of up until this point, we've been thinking about, you know, hey, we have this trade and, you know, we have comparative advantage of things, but why are we going to trade homogeneous goods between countries? Right? Like, why are we going to export or import countries between 2 countries, even if they're homogeneous goods? And so, does anybody want to give me a guess for a reason?
And different people might have like different factor endowment kind of things where they have a more specific, like you said, specific type of beef that may be more special or something like that, and are better at raising that. And it's impossible for us to like raise like Wagyu cattle like in the US or something like that.
Yeah, hold on, I'm like seeing how like that fits into my answers. You know that could be an answer. It is not one of my 4 that I'm going to give to write down in a second, but that is definitely a reason why. Like for the example I just gave you, this kind of specialized trade. I don't have I don't have that for this right here, but I think that that's a really good answer. So we could think about like here, we'll just put it down. Specialized, you know, production, e.g. Japan, US beef. Because we might want to think about something like that where we had this kind of specialized thing, exactly to the example that Olivia just gave. Does anybody else want to give a reason why we might?
In the case of that beef, would it not be that those are 2 like differentiated products, because Wagyu beef is like seen as being a higher quality and has like a different fat content?
Yeah, so yes. So to your point, like we would consider this as less of a homogenous good, but if we like just went up to beef, the idea of beef and not like special, like I mean, from that argument is like, are we shipping beef? And we're saying, yeah, because we've differentiated them in some way. So arguably, like, is this 4 reasons for homogenous goods? No, because we're saying that they're differentiated. That's a good point too. I'm still gonna leave it down because it's already written and I'm not gonna erase it. But I think that would be a good point. I'm gonna throw one out there because maybe to get the thinkers moving. Maybe there's transportation costs along border. So let's imagine, for example, that you, it's actually the example that's in my notes. Let's imagine that you are building something along the US-Canada border. And what if it is cheaper for you to go into Canada and buy cement in Canada than it is for you to go to the closest cement producer in Michigan, right? So the closest cement producer in Michigan is going to cost you a lot more than just going into Canada and buying it. The same thing happens along the US-Mexico border for cattle trade. A lot of times it's cheaper just to go into Mexico and buy cows and ship them into the US than it is to go to, you know, Colorado and get trade. And so what we have is this, even though we're both producing cows, we're still shipping them across the border just because transportation costs are cheaper. And so transportation along the borders, and so I know this is a very border specific answer, but you know, in anything like that. Does anybody have another one you might want to think of? Or another example? Oops.
Maybe seasonal products. I mean, some products are produced during certain periods of the year in some countries, but in other countries might be different. So maybe.
No, that's great, Omar. So seasonal trade. So exactly. So, and I'm going to keep talking about the U.S. because I just know a lot more about the U.S. because I'm American. But like we ship tomatoes from Mexico during this time of the year because it's cheap, because they produce them in Mexico cheaper, right? During the summertime, we ship we ship tomatoes from Florida, from other places in the country because it's cheaper to ship those. So sometimes there's a seasonality of when products are being produced that even though we both produce them, we're producing them at different times, and so we're going to ship them at different times to different countries. And so that's a great example, Omar. Does anybody want to have like another example or another reason? Here, you are super rich and there's going to be taxes on you. Where are you going to go to put your banking stuff? Where are you putting your money? It's in every movie.
Switzerland.
Switzerland. You're going to go to Switzerland. Who has Switzerland as a country? Somebody does. Yeah, Cora, you should have got it, right? It's like if you want to tax evade, like you're wanting to hide your money, you go to Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, right? Like you go somewhere. So think about it like services count as homogeneous goods. And yes, I know it's differentiated because you have different tax structures and things, but think about it like that. There are banks in both of those different countries. And so a lot of times you think about services where you're going to, where they're going to have, you know, I might go to a different country because it has some kind of preferential preference for me, or like Switzerland where it's a tax haven, or, and I know those things are changing. But we might think about things like insurance or shipping or a whole bunch of other reasons why we might want to move things in and out or ship from a different country based on services, and has nothing to do with it doesn't have to do with like comparative advantage. I was trying to think like, sorry, my brain got sidetracked for a second because I was trying to think of something like production where like the cruise ship industry, it's in the news right now because they're getting bailed out. But the idea is the cruise ship industries aren't in the U.S. They're based in the in the island somewhere. They moved all of their stuff offshore, so then they didn't have to abide by like U.S. labor laws and some tax things. And so it's this kind of like weird balance that people are upset about. Is like, well, why are we bailing them out? Like they're not even, you know, paying taxes in. And so there's a but think about like services like that, like why you might want to, technically we're importing cruise ship services. And then really, so this is like kind of, so number 5, I'm going to go ahead and do is, it's called intrapot. If anyone tells me how to pronounce it, I would be happy to. And re-export trade. And you're like, what is that word? I also can't say it. It's oh dang, go away. Intrapot. Anybody want to help me out, or nobody else has it either?
Is it intrepid?
Sure, I'll say that.
Is that a different word? I don't. Okay.
I mean, there's a word that's like INTREPT, like
that's
it's
probably
intrepid.
what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't mind. We'll pronounce it like that, intrepid. So these are goods imported into a country and later exported to another. And I wanted to make sure we talked about this because we're going to get into exchange rates a little bit. Maybe not today. And when we do this is kind of fits into this, or especially when we talk about balances of trade. So this is where we're shifting and we're moving homogenous goods in and out of our country, even though they might not have, why we might expect this kind of intra-industry trade. And so think about it like you're just providing storage and distribution to somewhere else. And so I have one example is Apple ships iPhones from China to Germany. And then they get housed in Germany for a while, and then they get moved from Germany to the rest of Europe. And so what we have is this kind of intrap trade where we're moving. I mean, there are some that are staying in Germany, but for the most part, they're moving to these other countries. And so it's just trade that's coming in and going back out. So they're both importing and exporting the same good. Because normally we think about it like, hey, if you import it, it's because you need it, and you export it because you don't need it, because your demand is moving kind of both ways. And this is where they're importing the same amount or a certain amount that they're exporting as well. Another example might be China is a huge user of this, and there's not as much as this kind of storage and they do the storage and warehousing for a lot of other countries. So products move from Vietnam or Cambodia, and then they go to China, and they get kind of combined and stored, and then they get shipped through the ports to the US. And so that's another example where they're just housing something. And so when we look at the balance of trade, oftentimes with China, one of the things we have to think about is are all those goods actually Chinese goods, or are they just shipping from China? And then another thing we have to think about is China actually producing all of those goods, or are they just kind of, because a lot of times what happens is things go to China, they get put together, and then they get shipped back out. And so they're kind of the final middleman before it. So they're being produced in a lot of other countries. They're just the final product is being formed in their country. An example is we ship cotton, Turkey ships cotton to China, and then it gets turned into a shirt, and then they get shipped back out. And so that cotton production was somewhere else, and then the shirt production was in China. So those are just things to think about in terms of this, why we might be trading these homogenous goods. So we're going to have specialized production. Again, I get it's not necessarily homogenous good, but if we break it, typically when you're looking at trade, we use a harmonized system. And I think we'll talk about that sometime in this section. And a lot of times it doesn't, until you break it down into really low levels, it doesn't specify whether it's Wagyu beef or US beef or fresh or frozen. It's just beef. And so kind of at that level, it's like, why are we shipping both importing and exporting beef with Japan? And this would maybe be an example of that. Transportation costs, seasonal trade, when things are in season, and then this kind of intrapot and re-exporting of trade, something coming in, potentially changing and shipping back out within the same industry. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? No, there's some head shakes. I think I have some more of the, a little bit of like economies of scale, and it might be why we're moving things in, because it's, again, why we're moving it into China, because it's a scale thing. So that was the kind of last bit that I wanted to have from the previous section. And then now we're moving into, let me get back to my black color. This pen is just too big. Section 4, is this too small if I write like this? It's good, perfect. Section 4 is the political economy of ag and trade. And so what I wanted to talk about was, we're moving into this. So we've said, hey, what is trade? We went through the classical theories behind trade, and now and then we went into the policies of trade, like so trading policies and tariffs and subsidies and things. And now we're getting into the kind of politics behind this, the political economy. And it's funny that we're talking about it last, because Adam Smith was a political economist. So economics came out of the political, economics developed out of this kind of literature is the political economy. So let's define what I mean by political economy. Or does anybody know what it means? Anybody want to give me a good definition? Okay. Political economy. And that is the interaction between the economic system and the political system. So it aims to explain the decision-making process of the government. So what we have is the governments are making decisions, they're making subsidies, they're making tariffs, they're making all that. So it's making some kind of decision. And what it's doing is saying, what is the economic rationale behind those decisions? Or how is psychology and how is politics playing together in order for these decisions to go forward? And so we're economists, we think about the economic system. We've gone through supply and demand, we've talked about welfare analysis. And the idea is that the political system is just as important to how those decisions are made. Because we have autonomy, our government has autonomy, and people are making decisions whether they are economically optimal decisions or not. An example of this, and you might see this in the news if you're reading anything right now, is pork barrel politics. Does anybody know what pork barrel politics are? So I see some people say no. Does anybody want to tell me what it is? Yeah. Nope. Go, Justin.
Isn't that just like give outs to basically get reelected?
Well, I mean, they sometimes are doing it to get reelected. So pork barrel politics are this idea that like you typically are like, you have some kind of legislation you're trying to pass, and you add things in to kind of help build up like your platforms. So like I hear somebody saying something.
Isn't it like why the nutrition title is in the Farm Bill, stuff like that? Like,
yeah, so like something gets started somewhere. So like an example of a pork barrel politics, here's an example. So the stimulus package we just passed also had money to help support, and I can't remember what company it is. It's a company based out of Kentucky that makes soap. Not that we can't support soap production, but it's literally because that's what Mitch McConnell was promised his constituents, that he would get them money. And so it's this kind of idea that we add things in that don't necessarily fit with what we're trying to do with a specific legislation, but we add it in because that's the way it's going to get passed. You'll get my vote if you give, maybe in Tennessee, you'll get my vote if you give the national lab money to study methane gas. I don't know, like something like that, where it's like, hey, you vote for this, and it's kind of this pork barrel politics. I don't actually know the etymology of it. I'll have to study that. Anybody wants to know that? If you find it, you send that along to me. And so the idea is that like, hey, the political system is making decisions that aren't necessarily economically sound. And so what we have is governments serve people and the democracy, but they're also serving for the re-election, which is, to Justin's point, we do things to get reelected. And so this gives way for lobbyists. And so the idea that it gives way for lobbyists, large groups. So it's giving kind of this way for this kind of lobbyists to make their voice heard. So when we get to hopefully we get to our current events thing, and we talk about sugar. I know we talked about, basically we probably talked about all these current events throughout the whole semester, but we talk about sugar. And remember when I told you how much sugar, the price every human or every person in America is paying something like it's like $2 a person for sugar tariffs or for sugar subsidies. And you're like, $2 is, I'm not going to go fight for $2 back, right? $2 doesn't buy you a Starbucks coffee, right? But those $2 add up to a lot for the people who are getting them. And it's because there are lobbyists who are fighting for those. And we're going to talk about why and a whole bunch of other things about that. But what it does is, because we have this political economy, because we have these concentrated groups, what we do is we end up governments are likely to choose policies that generate concentrated benefits and dispersed losses. So because we have these kind of very concentrated lobbyist groups, and because we have this kind of political economy for re-election, for kind of specialty interest groups, what we do, and the potentially the benefits per person are higher than the cost per person are. And that gets back to my sugar subsidy. The cost per person is low compared to the benefits per the person benefiting. And because of that, what we're likely to do is we get policies that generate concentrated benefits. We have 1,500, sugar farmers who are getting a lot of money, and the cost is being is being dispersed over a whole bunch of people. And so what we do is, and we do this kind of without regard, typically, to the overall outcome. And what I mean by that is we're making these policies, right? We're doing these things where we have these concentrated benefits and these dispersed costs, but they're not, there's not a regard to the overall outcome. And that means that we don't care if it's net positive, net benefit, or if it's kind of net loss. We don't care that there's a negative externalities. We're not looking at the cost of those. And as economists, we come in and say, hey, listen, we need to weigh those out. That we're not accounting for these externalities that aren't associated with our benefit curves. So since I'm already talking about sugar, for an example, can anybody think about a cost associated with sugar that isn't associated typically with our supply and demand? I need somebody to talk to me. Anybody have any thoughts? I only see 3 people. Anybody else down here? Let's see. Who else is on here? Riley, do you think that, somebody's chatting with me. Who's chatting with me? H2A. Yeah, something like that. Like Chris had chatted and said something about H2A. I mean, yeah, like you talk about like immigration policies or immigration effects. Anybody think about like the cost of we shifted from sugar to high fructose corn syrup, and there's an argument that potentially could be tied to obesity rates in America, and some other negative health implications. We might think about something like, now I'm losing my train of thought. Anyways, something like this, right? Like there might be these negative externalities, or maybe that we shouldn't be producing sugar and we should import sugar and produce something else. We're not looking into all the other things about maybe their environmental implications, of producing sugar when maybe we shouldn't, or I don't know. And I'm, not saying we should or shouldn't. Just throwing thoughts out there. Anyways, and so what we have are these market failures that happen and these distortions because we select, we protect things selectively, right? We went through this whole thing about tariffs, and we talked about you know, that we have these kind of protected products, and we get to choose those. How do we choose what's a protected product? And I think that's kind of the question that we want to ask, is how do we know what is a protected product versus something that we don't care about? And we know food in general, we want to make sure we produce food, but how do we decide? What were my 4 white commodities?
Milk,
Sugar.
Right.
Cotton
Right.
Rice.
And then dairy.
and cotton.
Cotton. So just repeat: white, rice, sugar, dairy, and cotton. And then we said wheat is our 5th one, right? And so, how do we pick those? Why are those our top 5? You know, in the world? And part of it's because they're very important industries to a lot of people. But also because there were people producing those that wanted to be protected, right? Do you produce a lot of rice in Tennessee? Anybody? I think I see a live. Thank you, Riley. No, we don't produce a lot of rice. We produce a lot of rice in Arkansas. We don't produce a lot of rice in Tennessee. So for you Tennesseans, we don't care if there's rice protections, right? But the people who are producing rice in Arkansas really do care, right? And so we think about kind of this, and this is tying into that we are getting into this kind of trade governance. Like, how are we understanding what's a protected good and what should be protected and what should be kind of not ignored. What should we protect, and then what should be you know, gone away with. What time does this class end?
10:55.
10:55. Okay. I have to pee, so we're gonna have to take a break. I drank a whole bunch earlier, and I'm like, oh, I'm not gonna be able to last until the end of the class. I have crazy news. If you all want to chat, I'm gonna run away for a second, and then I'll be right back. Because this was like, oh no, and then I was like, normally this is breakish time, anyways. And so I have crazy news. If y'all want to talk, yeah, you talk. I'll be right back. Whew. Sorry, guys. Like a whole bottle of water, just like, actually not a bottle, it was a whole glass of water just needed to come out. Do you want to hear my crazy news, or I have crazy news? Does anybody have crazy news that you want to share? No. Maryland's like, no, nobody wants to talk. Nobody wants to be on this video. Everybody wants just to get the class over and be done. But I'm stopping it. Maryland, don't you stop me. So one was that if you're gonna kidnap somebody, make sure that you can overpower them. So not that you should kidnap anybody. How about you start there? That should be the lesson of the day. Don't kidnap or do anything illegal. There was this teen wrestling champion who wrestled down a would-be kidnapper and held and pinned this guy down until the cop showed up. And I think, like, kudos to that kid, you know, for having the strength and to be like, oh no, sir, I am a teen wrestling champion. Hacha! Second thing, yeah, nobody has comments on that because it just seems crazy, because it's crazy news. Weird news for the day. My second weird news for the day comes for you, Omar. So Pablo Escobar used to have had a moat around his house, and he put oh my gosh, hippos. I was like, what? He put these hippos in them. They called them cocaine hippos, and it was because hippos are very aggressive. Instead of having alligators and things like that, and so they were Pablo Escobar's cocaine hippos. And then what they've done is that now they spread. They went out and they proliferated. And there actually is this argument that they are actually helping the ecosystem. Is that there was this biological hole from these extinct animals, so animals who have been overhunted, and that these kind of big, potentially aggressive animals are actually filling that hole that was left by, and you want to guess what the giant hole was? Left by giant llamas. You know, llamas are kind of big anyway. What's a giant llama and how big is that sucker? That's what I want to know. So my weird news for the day,
That's funny. And yeah, and there's a lot of stories that says that even some hippos have attacked the people that live surrounding that area. But the government has some problems to take those hippos from that area to take some zooms. But yeah, there is a lot of hippos on the area close to the property of Pablo Escobar.
Right, and like it just seems like it's a weird thing, right? You're like, hey, I'm gonna go to Colombia. Let's bring some hippos in, you know, but but I guess it said that like there's ecologists that are like, oh no, it's actually kind of restoring this kind of ecosystem, even though we didn't think it was good. And it's weird talking about ecosystem development. They reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, and it was a big deal because initially these the wolves were killing off a whole bunch of elk, and so there were all these people concerning that like all the elk were dying, and that it was going to kill off all of the natural prey. And what it did, it actually equaled out the ecosystem. Like the elk are healthier herds now, and the same with all of the animals. They're healthier in balance of these animals, because what happened was the wolves had been hunted down in order to get rid of them. So we got rid of this natural prey, and so what we did was we saw this upflux of these kind of the prey. And so what you had was these weak herds of same thing with buffalo, elk, rabbits. And so they say that like it's actually the ecosystem is flourishing now with the wolves than before. So anyways, so I think the same thing happening.
It's a great news.
Yeah, it's crazy news, right? Okay. Does anybody else have any crazy news you want to bring up?
I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around a giant
a llama. Same. Like I don't know what this looks like. I mean, a llama that's big.
It's like a camel-sized llama, basically.
Like legit, like a giant llama, camel-sized llama. But
yeah,
aren't like llamas
pretty big, but it's not
big?
like. The camels are pretty big, but I mean, it's not like. I don't know, probably as big as you're thinking.
It's not like a Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Yeah, like it's much larger than a llama, but it's not like at the size of a building, you know.
I was picturing how much spit was going to come out of this llama was really what I wanted to think about. You know, because llamas spit, and I was like, if this is a giant llama, how much more spit is coming? Oh, there's.
I googled it. I don't.
Let's see.
I bet you that baby one is the size of a normal llama.
I bet it is.
Yeah, this is some craziness. Hold on, I gotta I mean, they're still big. Wow. Yeah, that's some craziness. Yeah, this is imagine how much spit coming out of that sucker straight at you. Also, I just want you to know my Chrome browser is crashing, and I don't know why. And so I'm having to go back to Safari, but if anybody else has had this problem and you fixed it, let me know, because I like uninstalled it and reinstalled it, and it still is not working. And I don't know if it was I updated something, but
mine was crashing a bunch from my phone, and so I just there's an update that I had to do, and I did that, and then I stopped running it a couple times, and it's been fine since, but it's still kind of shaky, I guess.
Yeah, because it was fine, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh snap, this didn't work, and then it just kept being oh snap, and it wouldn't load anything. I couldn't get on a canvas, I couldn't get on anything, and then I switched over to my Safari again because I'd moved over into Chrome, and it was like, okay, well it's working in Safari, so it's not that I can't get onto Canvas in general. And like I said, I went through all of the things I thought, and it's just still not working. So maybe I'll just have to, I don't know, I'll Google it some more, but if not, but yours is still shaky, right?
It's okay. Just some things that I click on will just like freeze on like the Google Ad service, like won't load, and so it just goes forever. Like it never gets the right place.
Yeah, maybe I'm gonna have to switch back. The reason I switched over, in case any of you are going on to grad school or doing something, I don't know what Marilyn is talking to, but she's making very funny faces talking to them. Just want you to point out. In case any of you are going to grad school, there's Google Chrome has an add-in that does for Zotero, and it's a way to do bibliographies, and you can download from like Google Scholar too. And so it's really great to have this Google Chrome. It doesn't work if I can't use Google Chrome though. So just want you to know I'm upset about this. Not actually, it makes it sound like I'm super angry. I'm not that angry. Okay. I think our break's over unless anybody has anything else ridiculous you want to talk about. And not ridiculous, I mean, it's weird news. Or anything else? Nope. Okay. So, so we're back. So we're gonna go into, so we're talking about this, the political economy is the interaction between the economic system and the political system. And then we're saying, okay, the governments are making these decisions sometimes out of political motivations rather than economic motivations, which is interesting. It is just funny what you all do and then what I see. And so I look up and I just see like crazy things happening. And you're like, and I should just not pay attention, but I can't. Slightly, you can't go.
That's my bad. Sorry.
And no, it's fine. But I was like, is she gonna find a cat? Is a cat gonna? Is a cat coming up? And I was all excited for a minute. So what we wanted to talk about was trade governance. So I know we talked about the U.S. and if you, I think Dr. Andrew Muhammad teaches a class on trade develop or U.S. policies, like farm and ag policy. And so that would really get into the political economy of the U.S. specifically. I'm getting into more of like the global version of this. And so we're going to look at like trade governance. And really we're going to start with this, the GATT. Does anybody know what GATT is?
Generally accepted trading something. Trading something.
It is, you're so close. So close.
I can't remember what the last T is.
The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So GATT is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It was, go away. It was signed in 1947. There were 23 countries who signed. And they lowering 45,000 tariff rates. Hold on, that looks terrible. So the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was signed in 1947 after World War II. And what we had was this, because we had the crash of 29, we had the big wars. And what it was this idea that we wanted to have this free flow of trade. And then we have all of these tariffs coming in to protect all these countries. And we went to, and kind of as a world, we said, hey, we would do better if we just had some allowance of trade between us, because we're all trying to tariff each other to death. And then what it's doing is it's reducing our ability to trade and to be competitive in certain things, right? Is that we all don't need to produce all the things. I can produce the thing I'm really good at and I can trade it with you. And so it was obviously the objective was to reduce protectionism and promote free trade. And so, and this is not intended to be a history lesson, but this is a lot of history for the next little bit because it's a lot of just dense things. So the GATT came out in General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Is we said, hey, okay, we want to promote free trade. We want to reduce protectionism. And so they came up with these general principles. And these principles were is that concessions had to be for all GATT members. And this was basically their non-discrimination. Non-discrimination in trade relations. So basically, up until this point, you could have had a trade agreement, or you could have tried to have some kind of trade agreement with a country. And what they're saying is, hey, we're all signing this together, and if you're going to give it to one country in GATT, you have to give it to all the countries in GATT. And part of that was to promote this idea that we're not going to be discriminatory amongst other members, is that we've all agreed to come together and be bound by this general agreement on trade and tariffs and trade. And if we're going to do that, you don't get to say that that you're not going to give it to Italy because I don't know if Italy was part of this GATT. Who's part of GATT? Sorry, let me look it up first. GATT members in 1947. Australia, Belgium. Yeah, Italy was not part of it. It was Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Burma, or Myanmar, Canada, Ceylon, Chile, China, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, France, India, Lebanon, Luxembourg, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Pakistan, South Rhodesia, which is Zimbabwe, Syria, South Africa, the United Kingdom, and the United States. But the idea was that you're not going to exclude, like, you're not going to say, hey, Luxembourg, you can get this, but the Netherlands can't. Especially because like Belgium is in that, and Belgium has this problem of being part Dutch and part French, and so sometimes there's this complications of people in the French part don't like the Dutch people, and so I imagine that that's tied in that we're not going to be racist jerk faces, that you're not going to be discriminating against other countries. Number 2 principle is that imported goods from member countries should be treated no less favorable than domestically produced goods. So the idea of this is that imported goods from member countries shouldn't be treated less favorable than domestically produced goods. So something produced in Belgium should be treated the same as something produced in France, right, under GATT. So so part of that, right, is that we're not going to force some kind of requirement that hold on, I want to get to this. Can anybody think of a modern example of somehow that we've defined this principle in GATT? We've talked about it slightly before.
Country of origin labeling.
Yeah, country of origin labeling is a huge thing. And GATT had transferred over to the WTO, and we're going to get into that shift over history. But the country of origin labeling said, hey, if you're from another country, you have to be labeled in the US. Now, if you choose to be labeled, or our company chooses to label, that's something else, right? That's somebody who's wanting to market something. Country of origin labeling says that it has to be labeled by the US government. And it went to the WTO, and they said, hey, you can't do that, because you literally signed a paper. We signed this agreement that said, if you import a good in, you can't treat it differently. Like, you can't say like it's somehow distinctly different. And by labeling it, by forcing it to be labeled, not that marketing can't label it, but by forcing it to be labeled, you're implying that it is necessarily different from your goods being produced. And then that means that you're being treated less favorably. And so the principle behind GATT said, listen, we're not going to trade it. And it comes back to this idea of most favored nations. And so we're not going to have like that. You're going to have some kind of groups of countries that are going to be more favored than other nations because they're part of this agreement. And that you can't say that I'm even more favored than all of you guys. Now, we're not talking about consumer preferences, and we're not talking about label and marketing. And I just want to make sure that that's really clear. We're not talking about if consumers say, oh, I want to buy US products, right? And if so, let's say that right now that people maybe are a bit, skeptical, or maybe they're having preference issues, or not after 9/11, everybody wanted to really support American made products, right? So if we wanted to do that, that was fine, but requiring other countries to label that their shirt was made in China, right, is different than saying, hey, this is you. Now they're going to probably label that, right? They're probably going to as a marketing issue. And products being produced in the US are probably going to label that because that means they can demand a premium. But to say that, beef shipped from Mexico has to say it's beef shipped from Mexico because we're implying that it's not as good as beef produced in the US. Whether we think that or not, it's that we can't do that because it's part of this agreement. Are there any comments on that? Hearing none. We're going to go through.
I have a comment.
Yeah, you tell me your comment, Christopher.
Why is almost everything say made in China? China's part of GATT.
So it's because they're it is not because they're required to put it, and I can double check on this. It's not a requirement to put it on there. I think it's on some level, China is proud that they're producing all these things because they want to be known as the largest producer. They want to be known as, and that's part of their like branding, is that they're like, hey, listen, we produce all these things. But like, if you imagine that you didn't grow up with saying everything was from China, you wouldn't have known it was being produced in China, and you wouldn't think of China as this large producer, storehouse. And so it's going to be labeling from that. It's also potentially going to be from producers are going to want to know that, like not producers, like retailers are going to say, hey, I want to know where this product's coming from. People are asking, I want you to put a sticker on there that says it's made in China or something else like that. I'll actually tell you, the Waltons in the 50s, things were tight, and they would literally still, like, they had little stickers that say made in China where things were made, and they would peel it off and they would put it up saying it was made in the US, because it was where they made a little extra money and they could and do that. It wasn't good or ethical, just telling you anecdotal stories. But I would have to look more into that, Christopher, but I don't think it's not a requirement that it could be labeled, because that'd be like cool, and the cool got axed. But on the point of cool, that got really loud. I just wanted to get your attention. Cool as a mandated law is gone, and we had to pay a bunch of money or pay tariffs, and it was effective of money. But what they're doing is moving into cool as an optional thing, is that you can label your things if you want to, and that's perfectly fine, because again, that's somebody opting into something, not being mandated into it. So like if I'm Japan producing Wagyu beef, I want to tell you it's from Japan, right? And so there's kind of this like idea of like, oh, my beef from Argentina is better than your beef from the US, and I want to label it because I want you to know how much more awesome my beef is, as an example. Any other comments, questions? No? Okay. So we're going to go into number 3, and that is, okay, so I was reading, try to see how I shorten it. Domestic productions should be through tariffs and not non-tariff trade barriers. So we've gone through all this thing where we're saying the WTO is going to come out and say, and that's what we're going to get to in a little bit, that says, hey, get rid of all of your barriers, right? But GATT, when it came out, said, hey, don't use non-tariff trade barriers, and that if you're going to have domestic productions, make them be tariff. And the reason behind that is non-tariff trade barriers are really hard to fight, right? Like we're going to get into harmonization of those non-tariff trade barriers of like, hey, you have to follow the WHO, or you have to follow the OIE, or you have to follow these kind of other world organization standards for health and safety. But what we have is we're basically prohibiting these quantitative. So we're trying to get rid of like quotas and quota systems as part of GATT. Again, number 1947. And then number 4 is special provisions should be provided to promote trade with developing countries. We call those, we moved away from the terms developing and developed because it's who has a standard for that. And we moved into incomes. So I think we talked about that earlier in the semester. So we call these, typically now it's low income countries. And so we say special provisions should be provided to promote trade with low income countries. Low income countries. And this is, hey, let's help people out, right? That like we can make special provisions to help trade, to promote trade with these developing countries. And so if you are, and this isn't like the US shipping to the low income countries, which could be more so that like, hey, we can make special provisions so that they can ship things back this way. So that it's this kind of helping benefit the trade flows of these low income countries so that they can have influx of money coming in order to develop industries or for exports. So coming back up, so we had GATT, we had these general principles. And so these are kind of the cornerstone of what dictated our international trade. And we're going to move into a little bit of the kind of other factors that contribute to this. So we're going to eventually move into the WTO and the additional principles that they added to it. Remember 1947, this was a pretty big deal. Because you had, you know, up until this point in U.S. history, we had laissez-faire. We said we don't need the rest of the world. You know, we had, you know, World War I. You know, strained relations with some of the other countries in the world. And we came back and we said, hey, listen, we want to come together and we want to reduce this kind of tarification. We want to
that was a sound from somewhere else. Oh, y'all can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Probably not as well. Hold on a second. Just hear. I know. Hold up, Jax. And we should be done.
Can you hear me? Good. It's my AirPods they're old. They don't last very long anymore. Okay, and so then we can be almost done. I have one more thing, which is main activities at GATT. And then we can be done for the day. So the main activities at GATT were reduce tariff and non-tariff trade barriers. Number 2 is eliminate quantitative restrictions. Their words, not mine. That means like quotas. They want to get rid of this quantitative reduction of production, that you're going to have a quota system, because we know that those are trade distorting, exceptionally trade distorting. Number 3 was settle trade disputes or settlement of trade disputes. And number 4 is trade policy review. And so, okay, we'll be done with this for a second. Okay, so what they had was we had these main activities of GATT. We say, what was GATT created to do? And it was created to reduce tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers. It was meant to eliminate quantitative restrictions, i.e. quotas, this kind of quantitative restriction on production or trade. It was meant to create the settlement of trade disputes. So when there are trade disputes, that somebody can settle them. And it was meant to trade policy reviews, meant to be able to come in, which is part of the settlement, right? Is that it was going to review your policies and make sure that you're aligning with the others. So we had these other principles, right? We said we had these principles that you can have these special provisions. You want to make sure you're not making special provisions for other countries, or that you're not being discriminatory to somebody in the GATT, or these other factors. One of the things, is that, sorry, I'm trying to think. They have these rounds where they also agreed to come back and talk about this again. And so we next class are going to get into the different rounds of GATT and when the WTO developed. Is that one of the things they did create was an escape clause that if members could withdraw or modify trade concessions if there was an increase in imports resulting from trade concessions. So basically, if you were injured by making a concession, you were able to say, hey, hold up, and put a pause button on it. And so GATT wasn't just like, hey, you have to open your borders and what happens will happen. If you were somehow injured by some kind of trade concession, you were able to kind of say escape hatch. The problem is that you all might guess, what might a problem you think might come out of this?
Certain countries that are within the agreement might like come together to form a conglomerate that votes a certain way.
Yeah, so we totally could see some kind of coordinated voting. We might also see something where people use their escape hatch as a way of trade protection. So not because they were actually injured, is because they wanted to have some kind of domestic support. And so like, oh, never mind, escape hatch and blow the lid off this thing. We might also see is we said there's settlement of trade disputes and trade policy review. Did you see anything about some kind of ability to punish or some kind of holding anybody's feet to the fire? So that's part of the problem that GATT is going to have, is that there's that they can say, hey, you're supposed to do this thing. They have this way of saying that they're going to settle it, but there's no way to enforce it. And the problem with a problem with laws anywhere is if you have nobody to enforce them, or you have no legal justification to enforce them, then they effectively don't matter. And so it's not that GATT didn't matter, and it's not that GATT didn't do something or push the envelope in terms of free trade. It's that GATT also had issues. Is it that, when we had these trade issues, we weren't able to kind of right themselves. And so we're going to come in next time, and we're going to start talking about this the kind of failure of GATT to be able to trade disputes. And we're going to talk about what came out of because the WTO was created in '94. And we're talking about that. So from 1947 to '94, we kind of had this we're using this. We're going to use this. Oh, I don't know what message I just popped up on my screen, but sorry if it was anything. And so we're going to have this kind of talk about the development of GATT from April 1947 until 1994 when we shifted over into WTO. So with that, we are going to be done for the day. I know you got 5 whole minutes back. And you're so excited. You thought, man, this class is going to be done really fast. We're going to be online and she can't talk that long. Joke's on you guys. Are there any questions before we end class? As a quick reminder, because I keep forgetting to post it on Canvas, you're supposed to send me a rough outline or rough draft or kind of first stabs at writing your paper. That was it's due on Thursday. If you'll just email that to me. I don't have something up because it's part of your overall project grade. And so I'll just have a recorded grade for you and then add it to your final grade. It's meant to discuss your paper. You're supposed to be thinking about that. As another question, and I can send out like a doodle poll or a question or something later if you all would like that. We had a final that was due on the finals day. You're not presenting in class anymore because I think that sounds miserable. I guess we can. Hold on. I guess here's a question. Do you want to present your countries and we all watch you on Zoom? That's an option, and we can do that the last few classes. Or if because up until this point, I've said we're going to cancel the presentations and you just turn your paper into me. In which case, we could do your exam, your final exam, or your second exam midterm, the last day of class. Any feedback? Would you like to vote? Would you like to not vote?
I think just do an exam.
No presentation. Exam last day.
I agree on exam.
Yeah.
So the first option is do a presentation, and then the second option is just turn in the paper and do the exam.
No, so the first option is you do a presentation, turn in your paper, and then the exam is on finals day. Like it's
Okay.
8 or something.
Okay.
Second option is we nix the presentation, you turn in your exam, and we do the final on the last day of class. It's not a final, it's a second midterm. It's on the last day of class rather than, I think regardless of how you vote, Marilyn, I think everybody else is voting for the exam.
No, I like the second one. That sounds good.
Okay. So I will switch the dates online so that it reflects that. And then, but just so you know, there's no presentation associated with your paper. Your paper will be due, the last day of class. If you email it to me, it's gonna be so much grading, so much grading. So yeah, okay. If everybody's good with that, then that's what we're gonna do. You'll see some kind of note going up somewhere later. Okay. Well, you all have a lovely day. Also, Canvas is having issues loading the presentations onto Canvas, so I think I'm gonna put it on YouTube, and then I'll send you the link. And if you're inclined to want to watch it again, I don't think that this amount of crazy you want to see again, but if you want to, it's gonna be up. Okay. So, or for anybody who's not here, who doesn't have access to the internet, or who needs to hear it again. So, I hope you have a lovely day. Again, if you need to know anything about your exams, email me, and I will see you later.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, somebody has a question.
It's me.
Hi.
You might have said this. I was gone for like the first 2 or 3 minutes, but are you gonna send us our exams so we can see?
No, so I didn't grade your exams. I didn't print them off. So I literally just graded them, and then was like, what I did was I had a work with it. I'll give you to your thing and say what I did tell everybody. I had an Excel spreadsheet and I had different questions. And so I just wrote how many points you got per question. So I graded them. I just didn't write any notes. And so if you are inclined to want to know what you missed or how many points you got on different questions, if you will let me know, I can email you. Basically, it'll be like a snapshot of like, here's the different questions. Here's the points you got. Huh?
I haven't actually looked at my grade yet. I didn't.
Well, you can, once you look at your grade, and if you would like to see that, let me know. And then I can also like chat. I'm happy to chat with anybody about them. It's just really hard. Like there's no good way to like on paper, I write comments, right? There's no good way to write comments. I mean, I guess I could comment in the Word document.
Don't worry about it. I just was curious. I'm curious which one I missed. That's all.
Yeah, I don't know. We have to look. But if you want to chat about why you might have missed something, obviously email me, and I will just send you my. We can have a phone call. We don't have to. I mean, we could Zoom too, but Zoom is such a pain to have to set up every time. But we can do that. Okay. Anybody else have any questions?
Hi, doctor.
Sahid.
Yeah, I sent you a message.
Yeah, earlier. Yeah, so you wanted to know on the last exam, you want to know the last question, producer and consumer surplus. So I am going to send out my my version of the key, and so you should be able to see what that looks like. Do you want me to go over that, or do you want to wait till you see the key, Sahid?
You can just explain it.
Okay, so here, you know what? Let me just share this with you for a second. I'll draw it out here. Share screen.
It's raining, but you can't go outside.
Same, my dog. She did not like the rain either. Okay, so you can see that screen?
Yes.
Okay, so what we have is some equilibrium, right? And we had something like I don't remember, 1.9, and I do remember, it's sitting in front of me, and 16, and we came in and we said, here's this world price, right? P world, and this was $18. And at this point, price, quantity, at this price, what we have is we're going to produce, Q produce, and we're going to consume, Q consume. And the deal is that we said, hey, all the rest of those countries in the world got mad because they said, hey, you have these policies, your subsidies are making it so your price is lower than everybody else's. And so they came in And they said they use subsidy programs. But when they did that, it drove the world price down because now we have all this excess production. And when they did that, it drove this price down to here, this world prime, to $14. And so now what we have is we have this new world price, which means we also have new production and consumption, but that's not what the question was asking. It was, okay, given that we have this, let us compare the original trade situation with the new trade situation. So let's label these real quick. So this is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. So then let's do, I need this to go. Yeah, I need this to go. Perfect. Okay, so we have producer surplus, consumer surplus. There's no government cost here, and then net. Old, new, change. So what we have is old. Our original producer surplus based on trade was B, C, D, E, F, and J.
Yes.
And then our new one is now just J. And so what we lost was minus B, C, D, E, F. Our consumer surplus originally was just A. Consumers now have this entire triangle. So now they have A, B, C, E, F, G, and H.
Mhm.
So they've gained plus B, C, E, F, G, and H. And so here, let me change this color. So what we're going to do is we're going to start crossing off B, C, E, E, F, F. So what we have is minus D and plus GH. So basically it becomes this space right here, this space right here.
Okay.
And the top one is lost by producers and the bottom one is gained by consumers. And so the idea is if we were looking for, what we're looking for is, sorry, I got sidetracked by a chat. Sorry. If we knew those distances, we could say, are those actually evening out? It's going to depend on the pitch or so the slope of those two curves. I don't have, I drew it pretty equal, but it could be that those two don't equal as spaces. And it could be that maybe producers are gaining, actually, what is that? Anyways, it could be that the producers are gaining and that other countries are going to win some of that back, right? So producers are losing a certain amount, but producers in other countries are gaining it. And so that's kind of why that final question came in and said, okay, well, how are other countries going to benefit from this? Is it they're potentially gaining what our producers lost, right? Is it that we lost something, but they're gaining kind of what we ended up trading from other countries? And so the total situation looks differently. Does that answer your question, Saeed?
Yes, that's my question. But the explanation you needed that we should explain. So if we explain in terms of consumer and producer surplus, like consumer gain more, producer lose. When the what is for? Am I on the right path?
Yes. So in terms of the I'm not going to talk about your specific exam question because that's FERPA regulations with everybody else on the phone call. But yes, so like if somebody said, hey, consumers are gaining, producers are losing, you're going to get some of those points. I did want to see the breakout here, and I would like to have, and I looked at everybody's graphs to see how they did it. So I would have liked to see that you had some letters and that made sense. And that you were comparing the correct thing. So I don't remember your exam specifically, but a lot of people compared autarky. So they compared the no trade to the new world price, which would have not been the exact answer that we were looking for.
That was my question is, do you have the test in front of you?
I have my key, yeah.
Can you read what the question asked for this one? Because that's what I messed up. Seeing you do this, I realized like I thought it said to do the welfare analysis with the original.
Yeah, let me read this real quick. So it says so I'm going to just part C. It says using the graph, fill in letters and do a welfare analysis comparing the initial trade situation, parenthesis, not autarky, parenthesis, with the new world price. Make sure to explain what the new outcome is.
Okay. I just read initial, so I took like whatever part A, whatever the explanation for part A was, and did it on that.
Yeah.
So I didn't even do the new WordPress. I just did the old WordPress.
Yeah. So I didn't. For people who did that, you didn't miss all of the points. But you did miss some because it was intended to be the trade with a new trade.
So can we possibly get something like answer keys, solution to the exam?
So I debated doing that. So my answer key is for me to grade, right? And so I don't have everything written out. I have things that like I know what this answer is. So it's like, oh, net exporter, but like your explanation should be much longer than just this one word. And so every individual question. What I plan on doing is sending out the graph. So this graph for that question for everybody. I have a note to myself. Send a key to number 12. If you want to know specifically any individual answers, I can do that, but I don't have like I have a handwritten key right now. Like I don't have something on in Word, like written all out. And again, I don't have the key isn't long answers. Okay. I'm gonna have to debate on that is what I'm trying to say. I don't have it right now. I could try to scan something in, but I'm also dealing with multiple classes right now. So
thank you so much.
Yeah. And again, if you need anything else, you can email me and I'm happy to like chat with you or let you know what questions you missed points on if you'd like to see that.
Thank you.
Molly, you asked what time the outline is due on Thursday. I don't know, by noon. I mean, normally it would be by class time, so I'd say by class. But I can't, like if it's not in my office by 10, if it's not on my computer by 10 o'clock, I'm not gonna get all crabby at you. So I would say by class time, if not by noon, that'd be nice. It's not necessarily meant to be an outline. I mean, an outline is fine. It's meant to be I want to see that you're making progress on the paper. I'm either looking that you have outlined what you're going to write down. So if you want to do an outline and have individual notes on, somebody else also just sent me a message asking about when they're due, is that I want to have like, that what you're going to write your paper on, that you have some kind of clear understanding that you've worked on it, because up until this point, I'm guessing a lot of people haven't started looking at the paper. And so that was my nudge to get you all to make sure that you were doing something on it. In one page, if it's an outline, it's an outline. If it's, a rough draft started, I just want to, basically I want to see that you're starting something. So you're asking me for more of what I'm looking for. I don't have anything specific as much as that you're started on something. If you haven't, we're going to have words. Like we're going to have words with people.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Molly.
So you mean we should write one page?
Yeah, at least one page. You should have something written for
like your proposal.
I don't necessarily need a proposal for your if you have a proposal for your project, that's fine. What it should be is that you should have already started looking at your project and you should have started looking at working on it. And so I want to see that you've made some kind of progress towards working on your project. So if you want to write out a proposal of what you expect to do for your project, I'm happy, that would be fine. If you want to do something that's an outline of your paper, that's fine. If you want to if you've started a rough draft and started your introduction, I'm fine. I just want to see that you've done something.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Does anybody else have anything? If not, Nathan, are you good? And Ethan? Perfect. Okay, well then I'm going to end it for everybody, and I will see Nathan and Ethan. I'll see you guys in, I don't know, a few hours. So, bye.